the truth and things that are in integrity, they feel good. They might be the hard thing to do. It might take more time, like more emotional energy, but there's a resonance and there's a feeling there. Pay attention to that resonance.
Welcome to the People Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of People Powered Solutions podcast. Today, we welcome a friend I met 2 years ago or so while I was doing my professional coaching certification, Monica Faberman. Welcome, Monica.
Hi, Lori. Thanks. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Excited to have you on. How about you tell our audience a little bit more about Monica?
My name is Monica Faberman. I'm based in Colorado, but I am an HR consultant and I work with companies all over the country and all over the world. I've been in conversation with companies in Canada and Uruguay, as well as over the US, and I support small to medium-sized businesses with their HR needs, and it's really full spectrum. A lot of times what happens is the client will call me, there'll be something that's on fire, whether their HR department might have left, their HR leader might have left, or they've realized that like, hey, we're getting kind of questions and we don't quite know the answers to them. Let's bring in an expert. So that could be anywhere from defining policies to creating processes. Sometimes it's, hey, we want to expand our performance management and bring in best practices, or like, oh, we just discovered this employment law that we didn't know we were not complying with. And so what else are we missing? So really full spectrum, partnering with leaders to help bring in a culture by creating processes, policies, and practices that support employees in doing their best work.
Love it. Love it. So that fractional interim HR, is your intent to work long-term with organizations, or do you prefer kind of the variety that mixing it up affords you?
Both. I have a few like amazing clients that I work long-term with that I absolutely love. And I also love the one-off project. Someone needs a handbook or they want me to look at, compensation evaluation. And sometimes it comes in really heavy in the beginning. And then I just stay on as a HR on call when they need either a sanity check or some employment law change or something like that.
Okay. Back that up. A sanity check. Love it. Tell us more about that.
I have leaders that I work with that, things come up. Man, some of the calls I get.
Tell us about them. It might normalize, some people's experience. Some of our listeners are CAOs and maybe they've had these moments and they've wished they had someone they could reach out to. Tell us about some of your favorite or most interesting calls.
There's a really wide variety. Lately, something that's come up that is really difficult is mental health in the workplace and employees like figuring out how to best support employees. And this is what I love about the clients that I work with is they really want to support their employees on their journey and their process and what they're experiencing. So sometimes there's, calls like, hey, I have an employee that's really struggling. What resources can I give them? And, what am I allowed to say? What am I not allowed to say? There could be performance management and coaching conversations too. We just did an employee engagement survey because the leader just felt like things were kind of off and they didn't quite know what it was. And something I always suggest is, ask employees, like ask what's going on.
I love how some of these organizations, they try to kind of skate around this and figure it out for their employees when at the end of the day, they could just ask them. They're the best source. The employees are the cause of that leader being stressed because they're trying to figure it out. But why not just go directly to the source and ask them?
Yeah. Because even if you might know what the issue is, the solution that you jump to might not be what is going to make employees feel valued, heard, or solve their problem.
Oh, absolutely, right? We tend to want to fix it for them and decide from the get-go how to fix it, but the more lasting or effective solution will be one that they contributed to developing in the first place. And it reminds me of when I started my business. I was still working in government then, and I was waiting for all my ducks to be in a row and to build some tools so that right away I can, out the gate, start to offer value to my clients. And I had spoken with my own coach at one point, and she said, "What are you waiting for?" And I said, "Well, I'm waiting for all my ducks to be in a row." She's like, "Who says people want their ducks in a row? Who says that the actual need is what you've already determined based on your kind of preliminary assessment is the need? How about you launch and then follow their lead and develop based on their needs and what you're hearing from them specifically, and make those solutions custom every time." And I was like, well, that seems easy and way less work initially. I can do that. And that one conversation is what finally kind of forced me to put myself out there. So same thing with your employees. Don't presuppose you know what it's about. How about you have a conversation with them? Okay, so you're saying you did an engagement survey because something was off.
Yeah. And I can also say, like, to add on to what you said, like I want it to be like a relief to leaders. Like, you don't have to find the solution. Like, you don't have to know everything. Just be in partnership and listen. Like, that's a big piece. And so, we did this, and that was a big listen and make the genuine ask, right? So that's the thing with, either maybe it's an employee engagement survey, or, even I've done like a cultural assessment one-on-one interviews, people call them stay interviews, where the leaders wanted to get a pulse on the situation and say, like, hey, what are employees like? They wanted a neutral third party because they knew they had their own biases, and they wanted employees to feel comfortable, really being honest, and then someone to kind of gather all that data
and analyze it.
Yeah, and analyze it, and make reasonable recommendations, because there are limitations. I work with small businesses, and they would love to afford everything and give their employees everything, not necessarily that they're asking for. They would love to take care of their employees, and there are real life limitations. So by asking, it doesn't always mean you have to say yes, but it is about the conversation. So if the answer is no, like, why not bring them in to understand, why the answer might be no. And then also what's reasonable and feasible. And then that starts that conversation. So are your leaders, or are you as a leader making a genuine ask? That's kind of the first step. And then the employee, are they comfortable enough, or are they able to kind of articulate, not only in a productive way, but also are they safe to articulate what it is they need and what would make them feel valued and help them be engaged and continue to do their job. So I think it takes both parties, is kind of my point there.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I love what you heard from them, that they want to take care of their employees and that they might not have the budget. There may be limitations, but I think there's so much that can be done for low to no cost.
Yeah.
To meet more of those basic needs that I'm always talking about, right? It doesn't cost a lot of money to help someone feel seen and valued and heard. It's about restructuring your processes. It's about restructuring your procedures. And there's a way to do that that will be that much more impactful. Beautiful is that?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, you're 100% right. And thank you for bringing that up. I feel like a lot of leaders feel like, oh, this is too expensive. That's too expensive. We want to do this. Our employees are asking for things that cost money, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they are. Out of that engagement survey, we kind of realized that opened up a conversation, and the business leader realized that the rates that he was paying people were far below market, and he raised the rates, getting competing offers and stuff like that. So yes, I'm going to put in the extra hours. I want to make this a success for you. And I've seen them draw that out of their team as well. Those are the ones that have that emotional energy and that emotional capacity and truly listen. And yes, they are going to have ego reactions. And as an HR consultant, sometimes one of my roles is to kind of be a sounding board for those things. And the most successful leaders, I say, like, yeah, I totally understand why you're feeling that way. Totally understand you're putting all this effort in, and this employee is taking the opportunity to authentically express themselves. So how do you want to show up in that situation? What you're hearing. And that takes emotional, spiritual, intellectual, it takes maybe physical, maybe go for a walk, right? It takes some effort to realign there as a leader. But I know a number of leaders that do that, and they work every day to try and create that.
Sorry, this is what a sanity check may be addressing, kind of helping them recognize the emotion at play, and then how could we better manage it? So increasing their emotional intelligence, essentially, right?
Yeah. Sometimes I have leaders that kind of overinvest in their employees, and they'll tell me, I'm like, oh my God, all of this has been going on and you haven't drawn a boundary or really hold this person accountable. And they know that they're not doing a great job and this isn't the best situation for them. And so I'll hear everything that they've done. And I'm like, wow, you're really accommodating this employee at the expense of you and your business.
I mean, because when you think about accommodation and 100% from an inclusivity, I went to the other extreme, assuming they have to bend to every whim employees bring forward to be able to accommodate their needs.
Yeah. And 100%, I work through accommodations for disabilities. And again, in that scenario, like I will always encourage employers to do their part so that employees understand the expectations and hesitate to hold people accountable. And I just got off a call this morning. They said they put someone on a performance improvement plan. They'd given him feedback after feedback, put stuff in writing, and the general assumption is that performance improvement plans lead to termination. Well, at this company, they don't. There's multiple examples of people that they really invest in with a genuine desire to see that employee succeed. And they come off the performance improvement plans and they end up being a really stellar employee. And the employer helped them work through a really good supportive energy.
So you talked about accountability from the standpoint of leaders holding their team members accountable. Now let's flip that lens. Why is it important for leaders to be accountable to their leadership role and to themselves?
That's a great question. And this is for better or worse, but in all the organizations that I've worked in, the leaders, they set the tone. And they would do things like they would bring in a meditation, lunch and learn, and things like that. But the core issue was the two leaders, they were workaholics and they overworked themselves and they didn't set good boundaries. And that just trickled down. Everyone ended up having to kind of work at that pace, and it was unsustainable. People that cared immensely about the people they worked with and about the work that they did, but they couldn't continue to live that way. Also, if there's ambiguity, if the leader doesn't understand their business, if the leader doesn't know what success looks like and what that accountability is at the organization, and they don't cut that clear vision, then it's going to be really hard for employees to feel successful.
Absolutely. And to your point about modeling the behavior they seek, holding themselves accountable to the role they signed up for and what that means, and ensuring that the way that they approach that role aligns with the broader organizational values, then transmitting that to the team members will make their job of creating boundaries and holding team members accountable that much easier, because they're going to see that this is what accountability looks like. Is a founding, I would say, if we think about my 5 behaviors of a high functioning team, accountability is pretty high up there in terms of not only can we put our hands up and commit to do certain dividing and conquering certain tasks, responsibilities and whatnot, but we need to have a level of trust that enables us to hold each other accountable to actually delivering on those commitments, right?
Yes.
That being able to build that trust and yourselves demonstrate that you're accountable to the role you signed up for will translate directly to team members understanding that that's the norm and that's how we roll, right? So accountability will become part and parcel of their everyday, which will increase their performance, right?
100%. And to add on to that, anytime I've seen anyone, a leader, a friend, whatever, you frustrated with a situation or with an individual, as a leader, your accountability is to first say, how did I contribute to this?
Hold a mirror to yourself.
Yeah, that is the first thing. Some of the best leaders, they take 100% accountability and say, how did I contribute to this dynamic? And then they will lead with that.
I like that. So you do work quite a bit with leaders, and we've spent a large portion of our conversation talking about that. You did talk about the engagement survey, and we went there as one of the inquiries that you had gotten. Did we land on what the findings of that survey were?
Yeah, we did. Part of that was there was a compensation piece there, but that's not going to be true everywhere. And also, it was a lot of things that people were kind of hesitant to say to the leader because it was a relatively small organization and they had a lot of respect for the leader as a human. And there were things that that leader was doing that were making their jobs a lot harder.
Okay, let's talk specifics here so that leaders can get a bit of insight in terms of what not to do, right?
Yeah, and this one comes down to trusting employees and listening to them to do their job. And in this organization, and again, I'm super maintaining confidentiality. The leader had a more of a hands-on role as not just a leader, and they were a leader, but it was hard for when those lines were crossed. It was really hard for employees to set boundaries. But I think also what it came down to is both trusting employees to do what they do and have kind of a behavioral accountability, not only for what was expected in terms of results, but expected in terms of behaviors. And in the sense that things trickle down, the non-confrontation, the leader wasn't super confrontational. So it made, and you don't want to be too confrontational, right? But you don't want to be non-confrontational.
Well, you're looking for that direction, right? They set the line of sight. They're the ones who will tell you this is where we're heading, and they're reinforcing that. And they need to have some level of confrontation or assertiveness, if you will, to be able to present that. Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah. And I will also say one of the other really valuable things was it did do kind of a communication reset. So employee engagement surveys, it's great to benchmark them, right? To do one 6 to 12 months later, do another one and keep doing it and keep iterating on it too. Take out questions that aren't useful or relevant and add things that you might want to know. Not too much, so you do have some benchmark to compare. I know one of my organizations does this quarterly and they track their metrics very.
What are some of the things that you've heard then, even with this other organization? I think people often wonder, what are the trends, if you will, from one organization to the next that always come up when it comes to what is making people feel less happy at work? What are some of the things that you hear? What's missing?
Well, this is a really interesting thing, and it could lead into another topic that I know we were going to chat about is change management.
Yeah.
And how that impacts employees and what leaders have their eye on versus what employees have their eye on and what really impacts them on a day-to-day.
What about communication? Is it often in the top ones up there? Or lack thereof, I should say.
Exactly. And that one is really tricky, I will say. That's a really tricky problem to solve because it depends on the organization too. Because I've been in organizations where they say, okay, great, we need more communication. We're going to do a monthly newsletter. And no one listens to them. No one reads it. And it becomes this burden, this checkbox that I have to do that, I don't find to be effective. And that's hard to devote energy to. And it didn't solve the original problem. So the change management and the communication go hand in hand. So when I've seen scores drop is when there is a lot of change happening and employees aren't receiving the communication, or they might just because there is just a natural anxious reaction or some kind of reaction. There's a natural reaction to change and uncertainty, especially when it comes to even job security.
It's really rooted, I think, any change that when it comes to restructuring or things like that, mergers, acquisitions, which I know you've worked with clients with as well. The biggest fear factor is rooted in that job security for sure. And the communication piece, though, be it a change management, like we're going through change, or even just a survey, the communication piece, as much as you say it's hard to solve, I think it's not if you think people just want to be in the know. If you boil it down to the very basic level of what are people looking for? They want to be in the know. So how can we facilitate it? But to understand the same way that there's more than one way to build a house, there's more than one way people assimilate information. So that being said, you need to make sure that you're multiplying the way and the formats that you're communicating. So the newsletter, check mark exercise. Yes. Okay. What are we going to use that for? that the most bang for our buck? Maybe it could be as simple as having these email blasts, having a central location where we're posting updates if we're coming back to the change initiative, maybe having a thermometer or a timeline that tells them what to expect from the change. How is this going to unfold? What's that transition going to look like, so that they are in the know and you're addressing any fears. In addition to that, a feedback emails created where they can send their questions, and you commit as an organization to answer those questions on a weekly basis. But then you take the answers and the questions and you put them in a central location, be it on the shared drive or whatever they use their intranet. If you've got like a one page that everybody navigates to access information, you've got this running tally of questions and answers. So that before I even go and ask the question, I'm going to check that out, and wow, there you go. There's an answer. That's not high cost, but what is it? It's facilitating the flow of information. Yeah. And that's how you improve communication ultimately, right?
Yes, 100%. And I do have another anecdote story here. I have one of my companies that I've worked with for kind of on a consistent basis. They were experiencing some financial hardship. Their numbers weren't where they needed them to be, and they were super transparent with their employees, and they did something that I have never seen. I've suggested, and I've never seen anyone actually do it. The leaders really took the time, combed through the budget to understand. They needed to understand where things went off track and the decisions that they made that put them off track. I've worked with other businesses that didn't understand their financials. They just didn't understand how their company made money. And so they really went through the budget, the decisions, where the money came from, where the money went, the decisions that were made that were impacting the situation today. They combed through that to put some, guardrails on and controls in place. And then they communicated that blow by blow, multiple years back to employees. And I was blown away.
Like that's accountability one, like leveled up. Seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine that instant trust building with their organization for them to accept that, yeah, we're all human and we own where we're at today. And some of the decisions we've made were the reasons we've ended where we are. But now we want to talk about how we get out of here and how we prevent ourselves from making these same decisions down the road, so that we're not back here 5 years from now.
It was exactly that. And they took responsibility, and they said, we made this decision at this time because we had this information. And so it wasn't a decision made rashly. This is why we made the decision. And then on the flip side, I've had employees ask their CEO, are we profitable? Are we going to be profitable this year? The CEO doesn't want to say yes or no because they're scared of that, and the employee might lose faith in them. The employee might leave. They might not see the long-term viability. And the employees literally say verbatim, I'm invested in the success, and I want to know what it's going to take to get from where we are or where we might be to where we need to be.
Yes, it's about leveraging that sense of purpose. That's what they're feeling. They're looking for that sense of purpose, and they want to know that they've contributed to the achievement of that broader organizational target, right? So, wow, interesting that the CEO would be reluctant. And I imagine there's a number of factors, including, just again, they don't want to disappoint them. Their ego may even be at play, but ultimately, that's how you leverage the power of purpose and impact. And you say, if we continue as is, here's where we're going to land. You made these minor tweaks, or do you guys have suggestions of tweaks we can make to hit that mark a bit higher? What might that look like? And involving them in that conversation, to the point you introduced early on in the show, right? Involving them in the conversation. Super interesting. I love that. Now, I know that we could talk forever, but I want to get to the change management piece, because I know you have worked with companies as they're navigating a merger or an acquisition or whatnot. So let's talk really best practices. I'm going to put it down to top 5 best practices to help your employees navigate and manage. And it could be maybe the employees, or maybe it's leaders, things to focus on to have a successful transition when it comes to mergers or acquisitions.
Yes, I will try my best to fit it in a nice bulleted list.
And this was not pre-prep. So I love when I just I'm just going to drop this on you, Monica. Here's your assignment. Should you choose to accept it, you got to accept
it, and you guys will get the information that you get. So I would say, so I went through the M&A actions that I've been through. Again, what comes up is there's the fear of communicating too much. I think sometimes that happens, and when to communicate that. And I remember employees know what's going on. They know there's something in the works, and it makes them nervous. Some of them leave, and that is an issue with M&A, and a reason why you do want to be upfront and at least to the best, because I also understand not wanting to communicate things before they're finalized. And every situation is also different. That's another thing I'm going to say. But one risk that truly exists, and I've seen it happen, is that top talent that maybe either party was assuming was going to be great, like go on to grow within this new opportunity, because of the uncertainty and how it might have been handled and the lack of communication, they're probably going to leave. Happened many times where there were employees that they just kind of took for granted that, oh yes, this is going to be like, great, and they're going to enjoy this opportunity, and they might have left before they knew what the opportunity was, because there was so much uncertainty.
The uncertainty wasn't being communicated, or I guess to that point, enough information wasn't being provided to appease some of those underlying worries that the uncertainty had brought on. Okay, yeah. So communicate. You say communicate as frequently as you can, as much information as you can. You said that a lot are afraid of giving too much information too soon. Yeah. What's your general guiding principle when it comes to communicating? What would it done right look like?
That's one of the points I was thinking of. What I've seen be successful, and you're not going to get everything right, but kind of anticipating questions that employees are going to ask, because in these scenarios, there are people that have been in rooms talking about these deals for months, and they have a different focus than the employee who is just finding out this news. And so understanding all of the things that are kind of anticipating all the things that are going to be going through their head, like, hey, you might be feeling XYZ, and taking that time, like I said in that example, like, here's the reasons why we made this decision. If you're worried about, think of the things that they could possibly be worried about, or ask someone that's trusted, like that might have come in partway through the process, and say, like, how was this? What kind of FAQ? Ask a few different people that you know and trust, like, hey, what FAQ, what questions should we be anticipating? What are people going to be worried about? And then I remember in these roles, I kind of take on, and I also will tell you, as someone who helped manage through that change, it was exhausting. It was emotionally exhausting, but I found a lot of purpose and in making sure that the transition went well for all parties that were impacted. And so that meant if you're acquiring a company, and maybe it's a smaller company coming into a bigger company, have one-on-one meetings with people. If you can do that in a few days, we went and we flew down and we visited the site, and there were, employees that hadn't had, parental leave policies, and they were concerned about the transition of the healthcare and how that was going to impact maybe things they were experiencing or how they were caring for their family. Those were questions that employees had. And I sat with them individually for maybe like 30-ish minutes. I was exhausted at the end of the day, but I was really happy to establish that relationship with them, answer their questions, understand what their concerns were, and then be able to just kind of understand where they were coming from and what they were worried about, and then take that with me in the way that I continued to communicate with them as kind of their HR contact.
And knowing, because now you had kind of this map of what their questions are, what their concerns are, and you can tweak your change management rollout and the strategy, as well as the tools and resources you are providing to them and the information you are providing to them, tailor it to what you heard. Yeah. Right? I like the one-on-one. I would also add probably team huddles, right? Yeah. So that fostering that sense of we're all in this together. Let's kind of support each other through this change and helping support creating those internal support systems so that it's not all on the leader's shoulders. We need to develop that support system between each other, right?
Yeah, for sure. And to that point, if it's a bigger acquisition and you can't meet with everyone one-on-one, I mean, showing up and making yourself available, maybe as an HR leader, depending on how high you are up, or if you're a CEO, like sending a message. In these days, record a Loom, like happy hour, show up for an hour, say hi if you can, like look people on the screen or allow people to hear from you.
I think you should. I don't care if it's like, if you can, you should, right? Like it's going to take you an hour. You probably have people that can help you prep, hop on there, and they just want to see and hear you. And if there are some unknowns, to your example of that group that researched and said, hey, we didn't make the right choices, same thing. Hey, there's unknowns right now. And even I'm dabbling with the unknowns.
Yeah.
I will give you the information once they are definitive, because otherwise we may risk causing panic and wreaking havoc where there was none to be had, because that never even transpired, right? So I guess understanding, communicating as much as you can, but trying not to communicate some of the abstract stuff before it's definitely going to transpire that way. You're not causing panic, right? Okay, communication and everything we just talked about. One of the things to focus on, something else they want to be focusing on as they're helping their teams navigate this change.
So understanding the cultural nuances between two groups coming together and the power plays that are going to be there too, because someone that was the CEO of their company is now maybe going to be a general manager and on a leadership team with different peers and reporting to a CEO. And does that CEO who's doing the acquiring, did they understand the type of leader this person is? Do they understand the type of culture that exists in that company? I have, again, this wasn't pre-planned, but I do have a tool. I am certified in, it's called Culture Talk, and they use 12 archetypes to assess these different patterns that they see in cultures. And you can do an individual one, or you can do an organizational one. Well, they'll poll the organization. So what's really cool is when you can take these two groups and do two group surveys to see the different trends, the different cultural trends and patterns that are part of that group's identity and what they value. And you can see where they're going to overlap, and you can see where they might clash. And then that is just assessments are assessments. Like we're all much larger than our DISC profile. We're all much larger than our archetypes, right? But they're just such a great tool to help people come together, to give people a common vocabulary and to understand and say like, okay, this person reacted this way to that. I see they hold this value much higher than this group. This group wants to get consensus and take time and doesn't want to feel rushed. Whereas this person is like, let's just push it over the finish line. Let's just go. So
what I love about that idea is you can then take these kind of two maybe polar opposite or maybe quite similar,
and you might not know.
And then you can develop the bridges between them, and you can build on the strengths. But to your point of common language, if they're both doing this assessment, you're starting to create this new world when they become one language that is going to help kind of abbreviate that integration and connecting phase, right? So I see that even as a team building team building exercise that has a lot of value in terms of being able to increase that organization's ability to abbreviate or expedite that integration. As we're talking, I was part of a massive merger when I was federal government. And in 2007, all of the employment services were diverted to the province. So we became provincial employees like overnight. From 11:59, we were federal, midnight, we were provincial. And they already had 200 provincial employees in that ministry. We came in 800 strong.
Wow.
So imagine some of that culture clash, 100%, because the federal government, being such a large organization, has these policies, very strict procedures that they count everything down, very high involvement in terms of the administration of the different funding agreements that we grant our providers. When we came to the province, they were a bit more laissez-faire, like they just do their thing. And if we don't see any performance issues, we're not going to bother you. Here's your budgets, we'll let you manage them. And it was such a clash of even just the workplace culture, but also the way we administered programs. But then add the fact that these provincial employees were feeling like overtaken by 800 who were coming into them, which is really
Yeah.
kind of a unique situation. Usually it's a bigger company acquiring the smaller companies, but it was the opposite. We were coming in bigger than them. And so there was so much adjustment. Honestly, I think there's ways that we could have been a lot more strategic about it, but it happened so fast and furious, we didn't have time. So what I'm hearing from you, and we're talking about integrations and strategies, to really just be more intentional about it and to take the time to talk to your people and then adjust and adapt your rollout strategy, your implementation strategy, and integration strategy accordingly, right?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, like, for sure, people are moving fast. And that's why I said leaders have been in these rooms for weeks. But in that situation, like, and again, hindsight, 2020, but how could you not see that how an influx of 800 people was going to impact 200 people?
Yeah. And how could you not put in place, I don't know, there's different initiatives that could have been put into place, creating these working groups ahead of time with representation from both sides, again, to facilitate that connection between the two before they even officially become a new entity. There's different ways that we could have done that integration a bit more strategic. We did it kind of, we were still there when I left 3 years ago, and we were going, quite strong and good, but that was 3 years ago. That was in 2020. So I'll tell you, from 2007 to 2020, there were some hiccups and bumps along the way from just a team morale perspective, right? Yeah. And then think about my federal colleagues when we transferred over. Just a last little anecdote. When we transferred over, not everyone transferred. Not everyone was offered a transfer because the feds were holding on to our youth programs and our opportunities fund. So only a select few in every office were being offered to go work for the province, while the others had to stay back. So imagine, and then there was still like a period of time where we had to work together. So that the tension and it was an interesting phase of my career. I'll tell you that much.
Super awkward. Yeah.
We haven't necessarily gotten to those whole 5 tips on navigating, helping your team navigate change. But in the spirit of time, Monica, if you had one nugget of wisdom or one tip or strategy you can offer our listeners, what would it be?
That's a great question. We've talked about a lot of anecdotes. We've talked a lot about a lot of stories. And I think some people can get caught up in like just taking notes of like, do this, don't do this. This is right. This is wrong. And every situation is different, but one thing that's always the same is that the truth and things that are in integrity, they feel good. They might be the hard thing to do. It might take more time, like more emotional energy, but there's a resonance and there's a feeling there. And you might not know what that feeling is, and that's okay, but figuring out like, what does it feel like to do the thing that's truthful, that's in integrity, that's, I want to say, the right thing to do in that moment, the next best thing. Pay attention to that and stay with that as a leader. Pay attention to the resonance of the feelings that you might be feeling. It could be like tightness. It could be the right thing is usually like, you know what it is, even if it's not your first choice that you want to put energy and effort into. So just pay attention to that resonance is my takeaway.
Awesome. Thank you. That is super insightful. I could continue talking with you forever because that's how we roll. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. And if people want to continue the conversation with you, Monica, or if someone wants to have a sanity check, how can they connect with you?
My website, there's a Illuminated HR, one word, obviously, illuminatedhr.com. You can also find me, Monica Faberman, on LinkedIn. That's another way to connect.
Awesome. And we'll have all those links in the show notes. So thank you for joining us, Monica. I think we might have to have you in again another time so we can just continue this conversation.
I would love that.
For listeners. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guest, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.